Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today to see firsthand the citizen science that's going on down under. And I was really pleased to be a part of the workshop that Libby ran yesterday, looking at bioblitzes and tools for citizen science, and then thinking about some of the citizen science projects that are going on. So it's brilliant to be here, and I'd really like to learn from what's going on in the community here. So I'd really like to start off by posing a number of questions. So what if we had insurmountable amounts of money where we could create cross-continental projects? Is this something that you'd want? Do you think that there's a need for it? And if so, how would we go about doing this? So I wanted to share with you some of the experiences from a UK and European perspective. And Libby asked me to come along to talk to you about one such programme which I've been involved in, which really looks at projects which started off in a very small geographic area. So we started off in London, scaled up to England, then to the UK, and now working across Europe. So hopefully it should be able to give you some insights into what we've done, but I'm very aware that Australia is working in a very different context over different spatial scales, different biogeographic regions, and different cultural approaches. So for me, this is about sharing my experience, thinking about the positives, what's worked, but also some of the challenges that are associated. And for my British heritage and the whole stiff upper lip approach, and then perhaps being open about what hasn't worked and being open with experiences probably doesn't appeal to that nature, but I'm going to do my best to be very open, because I think we need to do that as a community to drive the discipline forward. So I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey through the citizen science landscape. So I'm going to start off by thinking about some of the drivers, what's driven citizen science globally, but also on the level of the Opal programme. Think about building the network across spatial scales, across time, and thinking about some of the outputs. And then wrap up by thinking about some of the lessons and where we go to next. So thinking initially about some of the drivers. So this is citizen science motivations, but also within the Opal project. So, is it worth defining what citizen science is? Libby mentioned that the term citizen science isn't really that widely known about, potentially in some of the communities in Australia. And I was talking last week at a conference in New Zealand and came to the conclusion that really it means very different things to different people. And it's almost become this umbrella term now, which encompasses a number of different approaches across different scales. But just to put this into a bit of context, the Oxford English Dictionary definition thinks about this partnership between citizens or the general public and professional scientists. In New Zealand last week, they're using the term participatory science, so they're thinking more about the kind of bottom-up approach to science involving community-led projects. And then when I was doing a bit of research on the Atlas of Living Australia website, the description that's given here is, for Australia's biodiversity, it is the participation of anyone who is not a practicing ecologist, taxonomist or biological scientist in the collection of biodiversity-related data. But there's almost as many definitions as there are practitioners out there. And one of the things that the European Citizen Science Association have been doing is developing these principles. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but it just gives you an idea of what these fundamental pillars are, so that there's this community of practice and we all know what we're talking about when we're thinking about citizen science. So a bit of the history. So volunteer collection of data is not a new thing. It's been going on for centuries. If you think about the likes of Darwin, the gentleman scientist collecting records early in the mid-1800s. You can skip forward to the turn of the century when there's the first examples of mass participation projects. So the Audubon Christmas bird count. I believe this is running for 116 years now and collecting around 63 million records of birds. And then more recently, this notion of citizen science. and which really rides off the wave of technology which is supporting anyone and everyone to take part at different levels. So the forerunners for this movement, really Alan Irwin in the UK, who thought about the democratisation of science. Everyone has the right to contribute to knowledge acquisition. And Rick Bonney in the US, who through the Cornell Lab for Ornithology developed citizen science practices through science communication and wanting to involve people in the practice of collecting records on birds. And because the whole discipline has really expanded over the years, then this notion of the science of citizen science has come about, and people trying to understand the diversity of the projects. You think about the Centre for Advancement of Science and Education, and they come up with this pyramid, so thinking about minimal involvement, utilising idle computer power through contributories, people contributing to data collection, through people getting involved in more stages of the scientific process with the co-created. And then a number of researchers in the UK looking at trying to classify projects. So if those of you familiar with PCA, Michael Pocock looked at trying to understand where the patterns lay within different projects, and he started to think about the scales over which they operate. And there's a number of projects which fall into each of these areas, and Opal pretty much sits in the middle of that diagram. And it's developing with global resources, so there's guides to citizen science, running blind blitzes, there's the journal that has been launched by the Citizen Science Association, and just this week a book about analysing the role of citizen science, which has some really interesting chapters covering a broad array of topics on the subject. And now there's recognition and policy as well. So a memorandum was issued with the US federal agencies giving advice about citizen science. In Australia, the Office of the Chief Scientist released this paper, and in Europe there's a green paper on citizen science. And as such, there's associations popping up all over. So I don't need to go into too much detail here because you're acutely aware of the Australian Citizen Science Association. But there are conferences popping up, so sessions like this, the American Association next year, and then smaller scale conferences that I was at last week in New Zealand. So drivers of the Opal project. So Opal kind of came about really before the notion of citizen science was developed, or the term was really widely understood. Driven by Sustainable Development Agendas, Rio 92, but also thinking about this crisis in taxonomy and how there were fewer people who were going through the education system learning about how to identify different species. This notion of the nature deficit disorder, so more and more people growing up in urban areas and not having the opportunities to explore the outdoor environment. And a recognition that government cannot do this alone, they need citizen support. So the April network was set up in London, and from this network we applied for big lottery funding and set up the Opal project, which was based around the objectives looking partially at the education, partially at thinking about a new generation of environmentalists, but also knowledge acquisition, and with our objectives firmly rooted in the science outcomes. But importantly, building stronger partnerships between all of those organisations involved within the sector. So this is a broad overview. So we are looking at citizen science for everyone, so working at that foundation level and making it accessible to all those that would like to take part, potentially their first experience of nature, and particularly looking at hard-to-reach communities in the UK, so socio-economically deprived, ethnic minorities and disability groups. And then working across the spectrum from outreach at one end, so we have our network of community scientists who take science into the community, supported by a digital platform, And then at the other end, we have the scientific research around the environment, the different aspects: soil, air, water, biodiversity and climate. So building a network. This has happened over time. So we're approaching our 10th year in operation next year. So starting off with a lottery grant of £13 million and adding to that over the years. Launching various national surveys. So I've got some examples of some of our surveys at the front, so please feel free to come and take these at the end. And then I mentioned the digital suite to support the range of activities that we conduct. So spoke about this a bit yesterday, thinking about Indicia for capturing records, iSpot for supporting identifications, and the website to create the community of citizen science participants. And then the European Citizen Science Association, which we set up a number of years ago, which was trying to build the community across Europe, because there was a recognition that we wanted to share best practice on a wider scale. And then as we expanded from England to the UK, it provided the opportunity to relook at the surveys and think about whether they were appropriate in new geographic regions. Obviously, some species will not be appropriate to study at the UK level, whereas they were at UK level. So thinking about kind of revising some of the resources as we scale up. And then developing some of the projects. So it's taking the surveys beyond just data collection to action within the conservation sector. So the pollination survey, people monitor their sites or their school grounds before, make habitat changes to support pollinators, and then monitor again afterwards. So different approaches. So spatially, I mentioned that we've moved from England from London to start off with the air pollution network, to England, and then UK, Europe, and where next. So the original local network was spread across different regions in England. Each region had a different focus. So the universities would be leading on different topics. So within the southeast region, for example, we're looking at air pollution. Up in the northwest, we're looking more at the social impacts. And within those regions, there'd be a project leader, a PhD student, and then a community scientist who would typically be a science communicator or have a science background taking the science into communities. And a range of organisations involved, from universities, museums, and other prominent environmental organisations, to government departments, Forest Research and FERA, who led on one of our surveys. And then the Opal UK network expanded 3 years ago, so into Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and shifting more of a focus from the real balance between the science and education, more to the end of the spectrum where we're looking at the outreach side, so the stewardship, the learning opportunities, but all the while having to maintain that stream of science. And the European Citizen Science Association. So this is one of the challenges with short-term funding on projects. We built the community of practitioners in ACSA, but at the time the Opal funding was finite. So it was challenging for us to take on the secretariat of ACSA, so it went to the Natural History Museum in Berlin. And this is kind of one of the challenges, thinking about the long-term life of a project, and how, if you're going to scale up, what plans there are for legacy or sustainability within those projects. So yeah, sorry, now I should mention that there's now 200 members across 27 countries in Europe, so it's fantastic to see how it's developing. We saw at the Berlin conference last year just the array of projects going on. And probably much like ACSA, the mission is connecting citizens and science through fostering active participation. And now we've reached a stage where we are coming together to think about Europe-wide projects. So this DIY science project, which has been led in partnership with ACSA, Part of their remit is to develop a Europe-wide project which will be able to support a lot of the objectives going on within the association. So OPA has been given the task of leading a group to be able to think about which projects could be applicable at this wider scale. So we're starting to think about how we can do not just a Europe-wide community, but Europe-wide projects. And then thinking about where we're going next. So we're at the stage now where we've been given a year's extra funding to think about the sustainability of the programme and thinking about diversifying where we're going. So each of our partner organisations are going to be taking more of a lead in developing different projects of interest to them. And then thinking about this as a collective, how do we take this forward, moving from what are local projects to wider scale projects, and then diversifying out to support all of the members involved. So some of the outputs, I mentioned the resources. So we have the in-field resources, which are kind of a fundamental framework for what we do. So we have 7 national surveys, each led by a different science lead. As we've developed these, kind of approximately 1 a year, we're thinking about different ways in which we can work on more local levels, so thinking about the more bottom-up citizen science. And I mentioned the action-orientated approach, but also thinking about projects that have developed on a local level. So we have a brownfield survey, which is developed by the York team. And then now, because of the interest in this field, it's led to the expansion of a whole national survey pack. So scaling up on the projects themselves. And then we have the online community. So this has grown over the years from the portal, which is our website, to the iRecord site, and then iSpot community, which is one of our original partners, Open University, and then they've really taken this and run with it, and now it's expanding into areas such as South Africa, and I believe they're moving further afield now. And the importance of getting some feedback out there to participants and thinking about if people are collecting data for on citizen science projects, how we should have the opportunity to be able to get that data back out to them and the opportunities to analyse what those data mean. So for one of the challenges we had was with our website, the function to be able to give instant feedback on survey results went down for a while. And so the community kind of fed back to us that actually it's really important that we were able to share the results as quickly as possible. So what we've done is we've developed an online portal called Opal Data Explorer, which not only allows you to view the data submissions, but also look at what's in your patch and be able to play around with the different variables and be able to think about if you're in a classroom situation, how the STEM subjects feed into the types of analysis that you're trying to do. So this is kind of how the technology has developed over the years. And I should mention that that's not actually launched yet. We're just in the stages of testing it. So hopefully early next year it should be available. Okay, and thinking about some of the impacts. So not just about the science outcomes or the outreach outcomes, but thinking about trying to capture what some of the benefits have been. So we're reaching almost 1 million direct beneficiaries. So that's people that's been involved in a survey or they've got involved with a community scientist in an event. And about 1/5 of these are from the hard to reach communities. Collecting a number of qualitative variables as well and trying to assess what are the learning benefits that are coming out of the programme. So 88% said that they learned something new, and thinking about some of the skills, not just in biological recording, but thinking about the scientific capabilities. And all of these latest findings are available in our report, which we launched about 2 weeks ago. So again, feel free to come and help yourself to these. Got plenty to give away. I don't want to cart many of them back to the UK, so the more that go, the better. And then thinking about this kind of learning pathway, so not just like the direct benefits that you get with doing an event and finding out about what beetle species it is, but trying to understand what it is that people are interested in and really nurture that journey so that they have that initial experience, they're supported to go on to take part in the local recording society or perhaps do a course on natural history. And so this idea of the kind of the learning journey is really important to what Opal does. And some of the research is also highlighted in the report, but we try and get the findings from the surveys out there in academic publications as well. So we've just, about a couple of months ago, launched or had published a series on a supplement on citizen science in the journal BMC Ecology. And this is looking not just at the scientific ecological findings, but thinking about some of the social outcomes, the motivations of people taking part, but also thinking about this science, citizen science, and what are some of the methodological approaches that we need to be able to consider to develop projects over time. So this is one of the recent papers which is looking at trade-offs between outreach and research and how we can navigate some of those challenges to be able to provide a setup which is a very balanced approach and is able to satisfy all of the requirements of the players involved. Okay, so we've developed communities of practice over time. So thinking about, we have the community scientist network, but I mean, it's a very expensive network to run, so we've probably got about 30 staff in total. And being project funded, we need to think about ways to sustain the network. So what we've done over time is develop this a network that is filtering out from the community scientists who then go on to train others in the community to lead on citizen science projects. And we have a number of key members of communities who we call our community champions. And they have been fundamental within their local areas in leading the citizen science movement and supporting communities to collect scientific information. So really celebrate them on our website. And thinking about from that stage, who are they then working with, and building up this standing army of citizen scientists on the ground who are all networked together and able to contribute to the wider field. So it's been developed and recognised in the political arena as well. So I mentioned that we had worked with Forest Research and FERA to develop the Tree Health Survey. This was really in response to a number of challenges coming in. So we had the Clara dieback of ash, which was recognised in the UK. And there's this notion that it would be useful to really mobilise the standing army of citizen scientists to pick up on early threats that were coming into the country. And so this is really kind of groundbreaking that actually this was recognised within the civil service reform awards as being kind of an example of where citizen science can really make a difference. And some more supporting these communities of practitioners. So we were talking about yesterday about this idea that there's a number of projects out there, a lot of which are trying to do the same thing, a lot of resources which are being developed in parallel, which are effectively delivering the same output. And it can be very confusing to participants. So we're really wanting to support citizen science as a whole and thinking about, we've got a number of citizen science projects on the ground. So for example, if we think about tree health in the UK, we have the Opal Tree Health Project, but we also have Observatory, Treezilla, multiple projects, which all are doing slightly different things. So we're thinking we need to get much better at signposting between them. so that we can guide people if they want to take part in a project for the first time, do Opal. If you want a little bit more involvement and training, to go on to do observatory. So then it can filter right up to the kind of official monitoring schemes. So how this notion being that signposting is really important. So what lessons? So as we say in Dorset, where I've just moved to, where to? Thinking about where are we going next and what have we learned from where we've been. So from my perspective, I was thinking about a lot of the subjects that are covered in the talk and thinking about this notion of thinking big and then potentially small again. So we've gone from England to UK to Europe, and we're at the stage now where we want to get back to the basics. So understanding actually who are we working with at these various levels of the network. So we're doing a lot of mapping to be able to work out how to make the network sustainable. Because obviously we're going from 100% funding to 0% at the end of next year. So an understanding of who those local connections are and how they're best linked together. So we're thinking not just about going down in terms of the scale on which we're looking, so whether those may be kind of local projects that we're looking at, but actually the community of citizen scientists is still growing. So having an idea of what's on the ground, but then thinking about scaling up the operations at which you're working across the networks. And in doing so, it links into thinking about collaboration's key. So Opal is all about a network of different organisations, and that's worked really well for us. I mean, it does bear a number of challenges because you have different objectives between, say, the university partners and the more education focused partners. But we're really thinking about kind of not reinventing the wheel and thinking about supporting the different groups and how we can utilise the skills within the different organisations to support kind of movement going forward. And then what do you want to get out of it? So why scale up? I mean, some of the projects within Opal, I mean, there's been a demand to move from the England-wide scale. We had a number of participants contact us from Wales and Scotland saying, oh, can you bring the resources to our regions because we're interested in getting involved. So on that level, there's been the demand to expand. But if we're thinking about why we did that, for us it's really important to have a reason. There's no point in doing it just for the sake of it. And there's been a benefit because if you think about in some approaches, it's really useful to be able to look across geographic scales, not just look at the smaller picture. So that whether that be a pollination project across the country, whether that be looking at bushfires, whether that be looking at reef-wide projects, then it is something that'd be useful to consider about whether that is a good approach that people want to take. So I'm really interested to see how conversations develop over the course of this morning, and I'm around for the next few days, and I'd love to talk to you all about your experience with citizen science and potential ways in which we can support you or we can collaborate with you going forward. So thank you very much.